Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology here in Owings Mills. Today is April 12th, 2018. Tonight's discussion will surround the recent announcement by the police commissioner, Daryl D'Souza, in reference to his selection of a board, independent review board, to take a look, an in-depth look at the murder of Detective Sean Suiter. As recently as reported on WBAL, because I have it up here on my screen now. Oh, by the way, guys, before we get into it, I want to apologize. I haven't been on in a couple weeks because I've been working another angle to a couple issues with the Baltimore City Police Department that require a lot of my time. So I apologize first and foremost, because I know you're looking for me to come on and I want to be on. The other issue, before we get into this, is that April 12th, being today, is the third anniversary of the death of Freddie Gray. For those of you who don't live in Maryland or Baltimore City, around the country and internationally, this would be the third anniversary. Okay, so having said that, there's been some concern about whether or not things have changed in Baltimore since that time, and I'm going to do another video in reference to that because that is a little bit more intense and a little more detailed. And I'm going to go out and talk to some folks on this one so to give you a better, different insight as to how folks feel, what's going on now in the city. But what I wanted to focus on today happens to be the fact that with this review board that the commissioner is assembling, like any review boards, if you guys aren't familiar with how they work, typically, several people, 5 to 7 people are selected, and they come from different aspects and areas of criminal justice, professionals in criminal justice who've studied criminal justice for a number of years. And then they come together and review evidence, the facts of the case as being presented by them. They do have the option to have assistance with their own investigative team to go out and look at and review reports and things of that nature. So that's what, when we talk about an independent review board, that's what they do. Now, the title of the video happens to be, with no subpoena power, how will they be able to solve or come close to solving the detective's death when you can't compel individuals who were close to the investigation, people in the community, if you have no subpoena power. Subpoena power is very, very important, particularly in cases involving, I would say, you would almost want to have subpoena power in a case where an officer was killed, and here we are 4 months into this thing, and we don't have any suspects whatsoever. And I would think that you would want to be able to compel people to come forth, whether it's civilians or whether it's individuals who worked on this case, to come forth under penalty, meaning that you come forth with what you know, testify to what you know, and if you don't, we can hold you in contempt and a penalty for not doing so. It happens all the time, and if you guys stay focused and watch some of the political wranglings up in Washington, D.C., you'll see it goes on all the time, where different committees in Washington, D.C. will have subpoena power and will call, folks in to testify. And, if you lie to Congress, as they say, you can face a penalty. And it's to be the same way here. If you lie to the independent review board, there should be a penalty. But in this case here, there isn't. So there's a case out there. I want you guys to kind of look it up. You can review it. It's from 1927, and it's entitled McGrain versus Dougherty. It's U.S. 273, United States 135, 175 from 1927. You can just type that in your browser and read that case. And it talks about it where it says just mere request for information from an individual or entity may not be enough, and therefore compulsion is required to bring forth their testimony, to bring forth any evidence that they may have that will help in aiding the results of this case, to resolve the case. Okay, and they indicate that in that particular case that volunteering information is not always accurate or complete. So this is why you want to, compel people to come in to testify. And you really want to compel people to testify in this particular case because of the department's historical problem with fabricating testimony, with officers forging and writing judges' names on documents with perjured testimony in the criminal courts here in Baltimore City, evidence tampering. You have to almost want to have a situation where this board has the ability to hold people's feet to the fire. So it has to have some teeth, if you will, in how they're going to go about doing this investigation. So that was one of the things I wanted to indicate to you. And so by having that, by being able to have people to compel, it brings you closer to kind of weed out fact from fiction. And as you know, there are three scenarios we've talked about. I know I have for the past couple of months. And so the board will be looking at A, whether or not the officer committed suicide, B, whether or not an unknown assailant killed the officer, and C, whether or not his death is tied to what was going on with the gun trace task force. So those are the three areas, and really the only areas that they are really looking at to ascertain whether or not how this officer, met his demise. And again, I still hold fast. If you guys watch my videos, those who support the channel, in my opinions, I'm a firm believer at this point that nothing else that I have found so far has had me to lead to the gun trace task force involvement in this particular case, or an unknown assailant. And so all of my information and investigation has led to a suicide by this officer. Now, I will tell you, I have up on my screen now is the WBAL report. And so it says here that almost after 5 months to the day, and I said 4, so it says here, almost 5 months to the day since Detective Suter died, the police announced who will sit on that board. Okay, and then it gets into number one, they're spending $150,000 on this case, if you didn't know, of the police department's funds to do this investigation. Okay, let's see here. It also says here that this is from the commissioner. The commissioner says that the board will look at all factors, including the possibility that the killing was a suicide. So even the commissioner has kind of said, not kind of said, he did say, they want to look at it whether it was a suicide or something internally within the department. He's talking about the gun trace task force stuff, rather than the conclusion. And see, this is how it shifts. They almost have eliminated the conclusion that Suter was shot with his own gun by close range by an unknown assailant, even though they say that Suter's clothes showed evidence of a struggle, police have said. And we all know that evidence of a struggle can come from many different ways. So it doesn't have to be where someone and you were fighting. It could be a stage incident. It's not hard to undo your tie. It's not hard to fall on the ground. It's not hard to do a lot of things to show that there might have been a struggle. It's not hard to take my shirt and rip it open and tear the buttons off. It's not hard to do any of that. Okay? Now, I'm just speculating. I'm just saying that it's not hard to do those things if a person was trying to show that there was a struggle. But the key factor in this particular statement by the police commissioner and is that we're going to look at it whether it was a suicide or whether it was internally. Okay? Rather, he says that, rather than, in lieu of, the fact that the conclusion that Suter was shot with his own gun at close range by an unknown assailant, right? So, it says here that the investigation is also expected to take up to 6 months. The commissioner pledged transparency, saying whatever updates we get, we'll get them at 60 days, 90 days, 20. I'm going to be transparent. So basically, the commissioner is saying every time the review board comes up with, a measurable response in terms of where they are in the investigation, he'll come forth and I'm sure report that those things to the media. I will tell you, I'm going to shift back now to subpoena power. In this particular case here, the most important information that we could possibly glean, let me click this off so I don't get sidetracked by looking at that. The most important information that we can glean right now from this particular case actually comes from his partner that was scheduled to work with him that day. Well, the partner that worked with him the day of the incident. I think his name was Detective Bomenka. And so, when we look at his role is so important of what he knows about that day's events or weeks leading up to that day events. It's like you can't believe, I can't express upon you or impress upon you at this point how important it is that detective come forth and testify. Now, this is the reason why he can't. The detective falls under the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in the state of Maryland, which says basically once this officer gives a statement to Internal Affairs, which he did, I'm sure, that evening or the next day, the state's attorney's office can no longer use whatever information that he told the IAD or IAD that evening against him in a prosecution. So they can never prosecute this officer with the information that he gave them. Now, he would have had to have given them information simply because if he falls under that law enforcement officer's bill, which if you don't know anything about that, you need to read up on it. Just put it in your browser, and go and check it out and read it, and it will tell you exactly what the officer can testify to, what he can't testify to in a hearing, dealing with his involvement in terms of whether or not what he knew, what he saw outside of the internal investigation affairs, their investigation and the questions that they ask him. And then on top of that, he gets 10 days before anybody else can talk to him. So even if the state attorney's office wanted to talk to him 10 days afterward, he could just tell him, go, what themselves, and it would be fine. And it's been fine, obviously, because we haven't heard anything from the Marilyn Mosby's office in that direction of whether or not they wanted to even talk to this guy, which I think out of all the people you'd want to talk to would be this guy. He can tell us so much. And if you go back, again, those folks who just followed up in this case here, if you go back, you remember I've always said there was a reason why the videos were being withheld from the public. It's because there's essential probative information on those videos that we know and the police department knows. And this is probably why, because I can tell you right now that Police Commissioner D'Souza has reviewed those videos, and I think in consultation with the mayor that they felt it best at this point to turn it over to an independent agency, right? Simply because of the cloud of distrust and mistrust that hangs over the Baltimore City Police Department at this point, and rightly so. So, having said that, we're at the point now again where they say 6 months that's all they need for this investigation. Well, I tend to believe it might be a little bit more, but that's okay. Give it less, 6 months. I don't think I have anything else to add to this, except I want your opinions on this case. I want your likes or dislikes as always. I want you to subscribe as always. Reach down the right hand side and click, so we can talk and discuss a little bit more about the inner workings. See, because now this is why I'm pressing upon maybe the commissioner and maybe the mayor and whoever else powers to be would want to give that board the power to have subpoenas issued to people, because we're not going to really get to the necessary truths of the matter unless people are compelled to come forth, because people have information in this case. Trust me, a whole bunch of people have information in this case, but right now everybody's sitting on pins and needles because they don't want to be subpoenaed for whatever reason. Because one thing about a subpoena can lead to a lot of other stuff too. At least testimony can. And so, if one thing comes out about the detective's death and then all of a sudden that's adjoined to something else, it could lead to some other things down the road. And which means certainly people will be fired, if not incarcerated. So I'm going to leave it at that. But I want you to, again, leave some comments for me so we can discuss it. And I'll see you next time I post. Thanks a lot.